Hello and welcome to Rolling in Mills. Today we have Masaki Kobayashi's 1962 samurai masterpiece, Harakiri. Now straight up front, this isn't so much of a review as it is just an analysis and kind of look over at Kobayashi's life. I'm pretty open about the fact that this is one of my all-time favorite films. It's one of the very few that I would consider a perfect 100 out of 100. And it's strange because this one kind of sits almost a bit isolated. It's a lot less philosophically inclined, a lot less artistically inclined in that regard, or kind of creative, but just on a pure technical storytelling level, this film is just absurdly good. This film basically got me into Japanese cinema, and I think it was one of the first that I actually saw, and it just absolutely blew me away when I saw it. I think one of the signs of just a fantastic TV series, piece of music, or film for me is when you're able to have immediate repeat viewings and it keeps that level of consistency or actually gets better. I think I've seen Tarkovsky's Stalker a little over 10 times, and that is not an exaggeration, literally 10 times. And that film still has things to offer for me. And the same happened with Harakiri, of course. This was my third time watching this film, and it just continues to blow me away. The cinematography, I think, is just by far the most striking element to this film. Kobayashi's use of leading lines especially and symmetry is just unbelievable. It's so technically proficient and theoretically sound, like he knew exactly what he was doing. Absolutely every scene in the most microscopically perfectionistic way. It's kind of like watching animation and realizing that every single frame has been hand-drawn by an artist. That's kind of the effect that I get from this. But almost every single shot in this film is just a masterpiece of movement or composition. The blocking in this film of characters is unbelievable. I mean, you take any shot from anywhere in this film, and the way that characters are positioned is so astronomically perfect. I just don't know how he did it. I don't know how he did it. Also, there's just this incredible sense of movement in his films, and not kind of in the robust Kurosawa way for the most part, but that does come in a little bit later towards the end of the film. But first of all, I think I should actually explain the plot of this. Tatsuya Nakadai, who of course is a Kobayashi favorite, he's basically in all of his films. In fact, Kobayashi actually discovered Nakadai and cast him in the film Black River, which of course he directed. He plays a ronin named Hanshiro Tsugumo, but the film kind of isn't about him for the most part. It actually takes place within two separate framing stories, but the kind of centerpiece idea of the film, I suppose, because anything else really quite quickly goes into spoiler territory, is that this is still the era of the samurai, but at this point there's been an elongated peace, and so a lot of samurai are starving and are in poor condition because no one needs to hire them because there's no war going on. And on that point, it's kind of ironic that Harakiri's central issue rises out of a peace rather than war, considering that Kobayashi is kind of considered like one of the anti-war filmmakers. Basically, the Human Condition trilogy just kind of cements that, but then you have like Him to a Tired Man, and then some of his earlier films, which I can't remember the names of. But it's interesting that Harakiri and even Samurai Rebellion both deal with the samurai class in strife as a result of peace, and themes relating to kind of the weakening of ideals and the weakening of people during peace. And these feudal houses begin having this issue where starving ronin samurai come to them and request to honorably commit harakiri in their courtyards, and of course they either decline or they give the ronin money, and then of course that attracts more and more and more ronin to come and pretend to commit harakiri, but then just get monetary benefit from it. So you've got this really interesting idea already, where you've got that very bizarre and interesting ritual, suicide, and honor element to Japanese society. But then at the same time, you've got people exploiting that for monetary benefit, which is kind of like the degrading of morality. But of course, without going into spoilers, there's a lot of exploration of those themes and the way that the story plays out in terms of flipping perspectives on characters and flipping the perspective on basically every element of the film is just brilliant writing. Now on that point, I'm not going to be able to really go into this film much longer without breaching spoiler territory. So from this point forth, this is spoiler territory. You can click this nebulous box here to take you to the end of the review where it'll be out of spoiler territory, and I'll just have my final thoughts on the film. Alright, spoilers now. There's not really a huge amount you can go into the narrative of this film without just kind of explaining the whole film, because it's so beautifully woven together. I think as I was watching this for the third time, I really noticed how similar it was to 12 Angry Men in a few ways, where you have Tatsuya Nakadai's character basically spending the entire film in this one outdoor room with all these people, and there's a lot of talking and referencing to previous events. But of course, unlike 12 Angry Men, there's actually flashbacks to outside that room, but the way that information is presented and withheld from you to give different perspectives on characters and events is just genius. The script for this film is borderline perfect in that regard. For example, the character of Motome, who is basically the son-in-law of Tatsuya Nakadai's character, he basically is used as the primary example of a ronin coming to a feudal house and requesting to commit suicide, but basically just with the idea of getting money. But the tides for that are kind of turned from thinking that this character is manipulative and is a coward to seeing that he's had to sell the blades of his swords to basically get money. And apparently in the samurai world, that was kind of the equivalent of like selling your soul to Satan. But of course, the characters in this film, in one of the more brutal scenes I think I've ever seen, and in a way that is presented without a lot of bloodshed, force Motome to commit Harakiri with the bamboo fillings of his swords. And it's just the sound design of this scene alone is just fantastic. It's still such an impactful scene here, and I think something that I really like about this film in particular is the cinematography is all built to essentially be absolutely geometrically perfect, right? There's a lot of plays on leading lines in regards to the kind of old Japanese architecture style. There's a lot of use of frames within frames, and basically playing on the absurdly perfectionistic ritualism that these people committed themselves to, and that everything and everyone has an exact right place to be. They must sit in exactly the right way, and objects must be carried in the right way and passed to people in exactly the right way, and it's so ceremonial, and that carries over very quickly into the cinematography. Everything here is so straight and plotted and perfectly lined up. But then for this scene, everything goes off kilter. There's suddenly Dutch angles, there's jump cuts. It is just immediately gruesome, and you really feel that after the rest of the film has been so flat and so perfectionistic. I love violence, I'm just putting it out there, but I love it when filmmakers are able to get that same effect or a more impactful effect from not using violence. The effect basically comes from using a Dutch angle when you previously didn't use Dutch angles in the film. Obviously there are other elements at play there, but that's the general concept, is it's startlingly different from an aesthetic perspective rather than startlingly different from just, oh my god, there's blood and guts everywhere. And on that point of kind of changing visual perspective and also changing perspective on Motome's character from this kind of cowardly person to being forced to kill himself with a dull bamboo sword. You also have a change of perspective on the people who run this feudal house. It changes from this place of kind of law and order and these people who uphold these moral values and also uphold these literal rituals where everything is perfect. But once the film starts to reveal that these people are actually kind of malicious and not really the nicest people, that cinematography goes from law and order to bureaucratic and restrictive and cold and claustrophobic. It's like the people and the geometry and the lines and the architecture just kind of start to close in into this like restrictive vice grip. the way, yet again, that Kobayashi is able to do that through aesthetics, through visual aesthetics, rather than just doing it through the writing, for example. I think that's one of the reasons why this film is so perfect to me, is that all of the elements just work together perfectly in tandem. It's not as if every single element in this film is as good as, say, the writing or the visual design, but it's all aesthetically tied in such a way that every single element in every single scene and every single shot is just in harmony with itself, and it gives off just this air of just masterful perfection to every scene. Kurosawa is often kind of described as the Beethoven of Japanese cinema, or just the Beethoven of cinema. Kobayashi equally gives off that air of just masterful confidence, and I'm not sure who I'd compare him to. My knowledge of classical music isn't vast enough for that, but his style just comes across more in that absolutely articulated, perfectionist, almost Kubrick-esque style, rather than Kurosawa's far more like emotional and robust kind of style. One of my favorite scenes, set pieces, and of course jewels in any film comes at the end of this film, where Tatsuya Nakadai, in what is just a fantastic reveal, has hunted down these 3 samurai from the feudal house that forced his son-in-law, of course, to commit harakiri with a bamboo sword. And he basically goes around and doesn't kill them. All he does is just cut off their top knots, which basically is the samurai equivalent of death. But we just get this fight scene from Tatsuya Nakadai, who has kind of been this strangely enigmatic, on the cusp of being kind of aloof and friendly, and then in the next moment, serial killer mode.
食い詰め浪人の貧乏話で拉致もござらぬが、今日は他人の身でも、明日は我が身ということもある。
But he has, as the film kind of unravels, revealed himself to just be this very powerful and reserved person, and his opponent is equally as such, and we just get this kind of clash of immovable forces set to this backdrop of just the most punishingly harsh and emotive wind just beating the edge of this hillside, and just the sense of movement and power of this conflict is just unlike anything I've seen outside of a Kurosawa film, basically. And yet again, like the bamboo harakiri scene, this is made so much more impactful because the rest of the film is basically perfectionistic still shots of people talking in a room, and then you just get the farthest extreme away from that, but of course handled equally skillfully. It's just amazing that he was able to capture these vastly different essences and kind of juxtapose them against each other, but the juxtaposition isn't jarring. It just adds to the greatness of both styles. Also, this film, unlike Samurai Rebellion, manages to keep its pace up despite basically primarily being concerned with people talking in a room about things happening. Samurai Rebellion is great, but the first hour and a half of that is just people sitting and talking, and a lot of it is menial, and a lot of it is just kind of get on with it exposition. It's not bad, it's just on the cusp of being tolerable, I suppose. With this, the dialogue is rapturous. Everything about the script just has a beautiful sensibility and sense of pace to it, where we're constantly learning little bits of new information and then having our perspective changed on events and then characters, and going into like the juxtaposition of that hill scene isn't even mentioning some of just the other beautiful visual choices that he makes. I noticed especially in this viewing that Kobayashi really likes to trap his characters behind horizontal or vertical lines. Like for example, Tatsuya Nakadai's character, his daughter, and Motome, his son-in-law, are in this kind of poverty-stricken situation where it seems like Tatsuya Nakadai's character just makes umbrellas for a living, and they shoot this scene where Tatsuya Nakadai is only seen through the lines of his umbrella when he's talking to a debt collector, and you can kind of see him being trapped by the actual piece of work that he is creating. And similarly, there's several shots involving fans and lines and trapping characters behind them, and it seems like that fan or the umbrella is kind of a symbol of being stuck in that poor working class, at least for a previously successful samurai like Tatsuya Nakadai was. And then you've just got Kobayashi's sense of movement, and especially three-dimensional movement. It's something that I couldn't really pinpoint about why his films felt so impactful the last two times I've seen this film, and seeing just some of his other films. He basically does Steadicam shots in this film 15 years before Steadicam existed. I don't know how he's using a dolly, but the complexity of some of the shots he's doing, like take this staircase shot for example. Is that shot on a crane? Like I have no idea how they did that. Or for example, this cemetery shot, one of my favorite in any film ever. I mean, you want to talk about geometric perfectionism, this is the example. I don't know how they did that, but more importantly, he uses that tracking motion not only for a left to right or up and down, but backwards and forwards very strongly too. Going from that staircase example, we see Tatsuya Nakadai's character going from top to bottom, but then the next shot has him going from far away to close. So it's like this carry-on momentum of movement, but on different axes of movement. Ah, my god. And I mentioned the use of leading lines before, but I mean, seeing this again, yet again, they are so noticeable in almost every scene. They just give this sense of just such intense structure. I think my favorite example is during the kind of final stand of Tatsuya Nakadai's character. Everyone's sword draws immediate attention to his character, and then they slowly begin to encroach on his space, and that kind of element of claustrophobia comes in, of the claustrophobia of order, say, that was previously used in the architecture to kind of denote law and order as opposed to bureaucracy. That element of using leading lines, yet again, I think it's a near perfect use of filmic elements for multiple thematic purposes. I think most of the time, most of it will just be abstract and symbolic, but here, Kobayashi taps directly in to a very specific visual element to tell a thematic story. I feel like there are so many intricate examples I could use from the entire film, but I think I'll just leave it there. This is just an absolute must-see if you enjoy any film ever, but especially if you're wanting to get into Japanese film or samurai film. I will note that this isn't your typical samurai revenge flick. In fact, it's very reserved, and for the most part is more like a mystery drama than an actual action film. Yet again, like I said in the beginning, this is a pure 100 out of 100 for me. It's one of my all-time favorite films, and of course I would highly recommend checking it out. Kobayashi is brilliant, and if you've already seen this but none of his other films, try checking out Samurai Rebellion for something similar. Then maybe check out Kwaidan, and if you're in the mood for wanting to kill yourself, watch The Human Condition. And that's it. Send me film suggestions of things you want me to talk about, and I probably, on a numerical basis, won't talk about them very likely, but it's still a possibility, so do it anyway. Yeah, Twitter link in the description, further instructions there, and yeah, au revoir.